Joining versus blending data. When you join tables in Tableau, you're looking at getting a couple items from the same database. You drag two items onto the same data source and you join them on their shared category. In this case, for these two tables, this would be order table. So we're going to go down to the order, and from the other table, it would be joined on the order ID. So over here, you have the primary key and the foreign key. If you wanted to add other join clauses to make sure that you're getting the appropriate rows, you can go ahead and do that. So joining creates a single table that you can use for your data set. Blending, on the other hand, is when you use two data sources that are related to each other on a field. So in Tableau's activity for blending data from two sources, there's a specific example that they're using to help you understand the way that blending works. And basically speaking, it is like uh, it is like the left join in databasing. So in the orders view, we're going to look at these categories listed. And then in the targets view, we're going to look at the categories listed. They are slightly different, if you notice. For example, we have this item over here. We have decor over here that's not over here, and we have several items like labels that's not in the other table. That's not in the other table. We're going to build a view to make this much more clear. So what we're going to do in this view is we're going to add the sales, and we're going to look at the quotas from the other table. We're going to make this a shared access. And we're going to do just about the same on the other table. So we're going to bring the quota in, and we're going to make a shared access with sales. The number one tip-off that you should notice over here is that there's one null value over here, while there are three null values over here. To clarify this, I'm going to go ahead and use category as a filter. And we're going to, let's take a look at these items that don't have any quotas. So this is labels, rubber bands, and storage. Labels, rubber bands, and storage. These are going to be the items that are different over here. Because on the left join, when you use the orders as the primary table, you are going to have, you're going to be adding these other items over here, even though there's no data inside of them. And it goes the same for this table. So there's a quota over here, but there's no sales data for this item called decor. So when you're blending your tables, you want to be careful with which table that you're using as your primary, because you're going to be missing out on some data when you're blending from two data sources, depending on which table or which data source you set as your primary and which you set as your secondary. Going back to joining the tables, right? This is when you create a join, you don't have to worry about which data source you set as your primary and secondary, because it's just using one data source and you are joining your tables pivoted on a primary and foreign key. This is something that you should be familiar with if you do database But if you don't do database, it just means that you're adding columns, and it's being the rows are being joined based off of this item that you set ahead of time, which is the order ID from the returns table and the order number on the other table. The third activity I wanted to show you guys today was blending data using custom relationships. So when you have two data sources and you haven't set up their relationships yet, you know that they have a similar field in both of them, but there can be an issue, right? So we have this state field in the orders data source, but it's called US state in the other data source. So Tableau is generally looking for the matching field name, but you can create a custom relationship by going to the data menu and then editing the blend relationships. You decide over here which one you set as your primary data source and your secondary based on which field was highlighted when you were clicking on the menu. If you are going to use an automatic relationship, this would mean that you have the same named field with the same data type in both data sources. For this case, we need to add a custom field. And this would be matching state to US state. And then once you set the relationship, then you can start using the data. Okay, so we're going to add the sales data onto the columns and the subregion onto the rows. And then you see, once you click on to the other data source, right? So we brought data from the primary data source, whichever, when you're using two data sources, the data that you bring from whichever table first, whichever data source first becomes the primary. And then the other table becomes the secondary. And then you see this linked field over here. We want to activate this, and then we can go ahead and bring in our shared field. Whoops. Let me try that in a different way. Okay. Let me try bringing quota into the details, and then let's see what happens. Oh, it's asking us to link the icons first. Okay, well, no worries. Okay, so I brought this quota into the detailed field. Actually, let me explore what happened over there. So when I tried to use the quota field, when I tried to link it first, I got a weird error. Okay, so let's try bringing the quota field, or no, let's try linking it first. That's right. We're going to have a problem connecting if we're not using anything from the data source. Sorry guys, I forgot about that. So one thing you want to avoid is you don't have to necessarily link this first. What you want to do first is you want to use something from the other data source, and then it'll link based off of the foreign key that you set. And that'll be fine. So let's go ahead and link these data sources. Oh, I don't want to use this quota as that. Okay, so I'm using a blended relationship here, but I'm not showing anything because I just brought the quota data. into the detail mark, into the details. What I can do after this is I can go to the analytics band, bring in reference lines that affect each cell, and I can then set, because I set a either by the sales or set it by this quota item, because I brought this into the details, it's now included in the view, even if it's not visible. So now I can see the quotas for all of the fields. And one thing I want to do is I want to filter these no, I want to filter these countries. So now I'm just looking at the US, and maybe that will clarify everything. Okay, less null values. If I wanted these quota reference lines to be more clear, I can format them. I can make the line to be as bold as I want it to be, whichever color I thought to be appropriate. And I can set the opacity also. Let's say I want 75% or 76%. Now I can see clearly which subregions in the US are either meeting their quota or aren't meeting their quota. One way to make this even more clear, if I go to make a calculation and I want to blend fields using a calculation. So met quota is going to be our calculation field. So I want to see if the sum of sales is greater than or equal to the quota. And take a look at this. So when you're using a blended relationship, it will set the level of detail to the aggregation point quota. Pretty cool. And then we can bring this over into the color to see with not just if it's touching the line, but if it is, we'll see with color if items are meeting their quota or not. So that is a little bit about the blending relationships using fields from two different data sources versus which something that is relatively much more straightforward in terms of when you have a database with a bunch of tables and you're joining them based off of either a primary and a foreign key, or you might have to mess around with it a little bit to get the particulars for their shared field if they don't have like a matching field, or if it needs to be adjusted a little bit.